So yeah, I'm going to go through, I got a long presentation, and sometimes it's a little bit more flavored to finance, and I looked at the list of folks today. So I'm going to probably, not as many finance as I sometimes speak to, so I will go through, I will probably skip a lot of my quote unquote more focus on finance charts. And I plan on covering the Yahoo case study and how we looked about the transformation of that company. I will talk a little bit about the CFO role, lessons learned. Couple of things on the last item, rules of the road, when I do have, and you know, and sort of actually one of the things I really enjoy going to listen to people. Even I'm sure it'll be for the sake of myself. You sometimes go through a long presentation and you might get one or two tidbits that you like, and you take those back. And the one I've quoted here was actually from I happened to be listening to Michael Phelps, of all things, in Mexico. And he was talking about the fact that he had gone through a bad stretch before the Olympics. He had some depression. He had, you know, obviously it's all public about his DUI and some other things he's going through. And so he came up with this whole idea, as he thought about it, his dream plan reach, and that's how he thought about his career. His dream high, plan, and then reach it, and that's sort of the way he. And then he said something about, you know, no matter what, never giving up, and I think that's true. And the other thing I was going to talk about, which he reminded me of a little bit of how I thought about my career, and this is something I think is quite important. I was listening to Bill Bradley speak. He spoke recently at Stanford. I'm from the Bay Area, and I'll go through some of my bio in a second. And he spoke, and someone asked him about. If you were in the current administration, what would you do, and so forth. And he used a term which I like, and you need professional courage. That was a term he used. I liked it. And what he said, and which I've always believed in my own career, is you have to always be prepared to leave if you have to. You have to, if you want to be true to yourself, you have to do what's right. And you never want to be afraid to, frankly, leave or get fired. And that was his message about having professional courage. And obviously in his career between, you know, and he mentioned some of the things relative to when he played for the New York Knicks. Obviously he's a U.S. Senator for, I think, 3 terms, and now a very successful business guy. So anyway, I just thought I would start with that to get going here. But I think so I am, you know, and so I have had a long career. I guess why I have some gray hair now. I started over 40 years ago, and I think career is really, you know, how you think about your career is really important, and I'll go through some of that. But, you know, I basically have been involved with 3 companies that I was process of taking public, over 10 that I've been on the board of that have gone public. One, that's why I was just texting just a second ago. One, if you look at the company called Zora up there, is actually going public on the New York Stock Exchange as we speak. The company management is in New York today, so that company is going public. And so I've had a chance to be involved with a number of great companies. If you look at the, I've also gotten a lot of involved outside activities, Cornell, FASB, PCOB, Treasury Committee when looked at accounting. So I always tell people it's really good to network. It's really good to get out of the office. It's very easy to be, quote unquote, very inward looking and be in the office all the time. So I'm always a big proponent of going to events like this and other events where you meet people and you know, and again, what you find is sometimes things, you know, may not be totally applicable, but then there are other messages you may hear that are quite applicable. I do have some outside interests. As noted, I've been involved with the Golden State Warriors since 2010 when it was acquired by Joe Lacob and a group of people. And that's been a great ride. We actually play San Antonio on Saturday. Neither team is playing particularly well right now, so we'll see what happens. And I have some outside activities. One of the reasons why I don't list it here, I took a job recently when I left Yahoo in June to run the family office for Eric Schmidt, which I really haven't put here, but it keeps me enough busy, but also allows me to do some of my extracurricular activities, which I enjoy. A few things about Yahoo, and what I'm going to go through is how we thought about the transformation It's a company been around for 20 years. It went through a number, actually I think in 2 years went through 5 CEOs. Marissa came in and again, how I usually get jobs is someone calls me and says, would I be interested? And if it's something of interest, I go interview and so forth. Only one job have I gotten through a recruiter. Anyway, the one thing is interesting. I mean, people really liked sometimes critiquing, if you will, Yahoo. The reality is, even today, it's only one of 3 internet companies with over 1 billion users, 650 million mobile users, and a stock price. One of the things I take pride in, and I'm sure you guys do as well, making money for investors is really important. And our stock went up 3.5 times and even more since we left and we split the company. Back in the Fortune 500. And so how we got there, there's 4 things. And this is, I learned this also in an early company I went to. We used to have a term called ACPR, Attitude, Cash, Profit, Revenue, when you transform a company. In this case, we looked at 4 segments. Adjusting the culture, which was really important. It was a really negative culture when we arrived there. Re-engaging with the products, updating the products, and innovating, changing expenses, right-sizing, getting expenses in control, and managing the balance sheet, cash flow, and so forth. So just a few things. Again, I'm just going to cover a few to give you a sense. More that my presentation is going to be focused on the transformation of expense point of view and how we thought about it, how we thought about the balance sheets. But it's really important in terms of culture. I see this over and over again. It's one of the things that's, if you look at, it's the same thing with basketball teams. It's the same thing in any sport you're involved in, any academic, culture is critical. We have a new president at Cornell. I'm going to be going to Ithaca tonight for some meetings tomorrow. And so setting the culture, critically important. So we did a number of things, much more transparent. Marissa had weekly FYI meetings. We did those on Friday afternoons to all hands, to all the employees. We did it on Friday. People told her not to do it on Friday because no one would be in the office. Friday afternoon, it wasn't normal Yahoo culture. She said, no, we're going to do it Friday afternoon at 4:30. We did. And she, I think in 5 years, maybe missed 10 of those in all of 5 years. So she was there, set the tone. Did a number of things on amenities in terms of things like made sure everyone had the latest phones because we wanted to be a mobile company, iPads. In the Silicon Valley, which is a crazy, crazy area, particularly in internet, we provided free food, which is one of the things companies now do. In terms of it, modernize their offices, and I'll go through, focused on working on campus and so forth. One of the things, though, there's a couple of things that I think were important. People think about a very laissez-faire attitude. Could not be further from the truth. A couple of key things to mention there. We created a series of goals. So each quarter, we would create the corporate goals. And I'm actually doing the same thing now in my little family office of a couple hundred people. Setting quarterly goals from the corporate side and made it go down hierarchically between the vice presidents like myself and then our group. So we created a very goals function. We would review the goals every quarter twice. Once, well, actually 3 times. One, we set the goals. 2 is interim mid-quarter, and then at the end of the quarter. So we would very focused on goals annually as well as quarterly. We did that for performance reviews. We would do a review of all employees in the company quarterly. Was formal in terms that we put a number down and so forth, but it wasn't a formal long-term big sheet of paper. So we would do that quarterly and more so annually. So very focused both on a goal setting, an employee review setting, and really managing the employee process and getting it back to a culture where people really wanted to work and felt motivated. Leadership is interesting. This is a team. None of these will matter necessarily to you, but the point I wanted to make is she probably changed out about 2/3 of the team when she got there. The team needed some refresh, if you will. Like anything else, some of those changes worked out well, some didn't work out well. But by the end, when we ultimately sold the core company to Verizon, We had a great team, and some of those are still there. Many have left, like myself. So products, so again, think about culture, think about products, and again, the whole concept here is what do you do in a transformation? If you don't have culture and you don't have attitude, you have nothing. It's why my first real company, I use the term ACPR, attitude. In that case, you need cash, because if you don't have cash, you don't run a company, but you do need attitude first. So products, just the only couple points here is, yeah, it was about a $5 billion company. We were able to, over about a 3-year period, transform with new products, $2 billion or 40% of the revenue there. So we did a real focus there on updating the revenue. So $2 billion or 5 was, frankly, from new products. Accelerated innovation, stabilized the declining business, because we had one business, again, I'm not going to show some of these charts, the business going like this, and then getting the new business to go up and compensate was really, really important. And really, we were an engineering company. And so one of the things that Marissa did really is accelerate making it good for engineers to come back and appreciate the engineering community. We did a number of different meetings that we would have for the engineers specifically. So again, got the engineering talent and technology back into the company. Okay, so here's more, and again, I just took out a lot of charts, so I really wanted to focus on expenses and cash flow, which is really the focus here. And again, what I would like to do is go through what I call some of my rules of the road, which is sort of when you've been around in 7, 8 companies, you learn a lot in terms of how they work. And so the number one thing that I want you to take away is we spend a lot of time benchmarking. I don't put it on a chart, but we use McKinsey. You could use others. But the number one aspect of benchmarking and best practices is you get to see in each function what's the best possible. And that data does not exist publicly. So whether it's human resources, sales productivity, finance, whatever, to get a sense of that productivity in a list of companies and where they are and really going down and understanding those really, really important. So we did a lot of benchmarking and look at best practices. We ended up reducing our spending by almost 20% year on year. G&A, I'll show you, we reduced G&A by about 2% of revenue, which is $100 million. Decreased workforce. By the way, the revenue over this time went up, but in the same period of time, reduced workforce by 46, almost 50%, so doubled revenue per employee, and closed 28 offices. So here, if you look at this chart, what we did is look at, these are the summary, looked at all the various functions. Green are areas that were relatively in good shape in terms of, from an efficiency point of view. Sales and marketing were there. You can look in the right side chart, which is some of the areas that had the most opportunity and how much spending we reduced. And you can see a lot of it is in the G&A. So what happens in companies that have been around for a while, they tend to get balloon up in expenses, particularly in the administrative areas. And so you can look at my own area in finance, you can look at legal, you can look at human resources, and a little bit less IT, and then customer support. So you can look at, if you look at areas like sales, marketing, we didn't really focus too much here on R&D. Well run, generally, at least from an efficiency point of view. And again, I would highly recommend when you go through your companies, think about how to benchmark. You think you can do it yourself, hard to do it yourself. It's sort of why when PE companies come in and acquire companies, private equity companies, they acquire companies, their first thing is they will usually work with some outside firm, Bain, BCG, McKinsey, you name it, to really go through and benchmark and see what's possible. Because companies over time, no matter how good you are, I used to think I was very, very good. We did the same thing, by the way, at Siebel Systems. I did the same thing at Fortinet when before I took that company public. Looked at areas that we could get better with the help of outside consultants. So really important there. And actually you can get that, and this is one of the things that's really important is to have a leader take over the project. I had worked with the same folks at McKinsey at Siebel, brought them in over to Yahoo, and so we had a running start in terms of knowing the people, knowing the approach, getting very fine-tuned, manage it on a weekly or bi-monthly basis, so constant repetition, cycles of learning, which is really important. So we looked at the bottom-up opportunities, we created a plan, targets, execution, and again, you will find, I don't show it here, but we created ABC items. A's, obvious, go do them. Immediate, no question about them. B's and C's, more discretionary. And what you find from folks, operating folks, probably folks even in this room, everyone says, I do the best. My group is the best, better than anyone else. I can't do any better and so forth. But when you see objective data, as opposed to anecdotal data, but objective data, and see best practices, and it could be, how many folks you have answering the phones per number of customers. It could be anything, number of transactions. But when you see objective data, that's what gets away from all anecdotes, gets away from opinions, and gets into action. So highly recommend that approach. So a little bit of expenses. As I said before, we reduced expenses by about 20%. And by the way, I'm hoping if we have a little extra time, I can take some questions, but I'll try to allow some time for questions. So I said this, and by the way, when you reduce, 2.3%, that's $100 million. That's real money. So that's real money in the company. And so if you're making 15% of profit and you go to 17%, that's a big deal. So this took us some work, and you can see, even over time, it was actually going up until we got our act together. So you can see 2002, we actually went up a little bit because there was a lot of, when we first got there late in 2012, there was a lot of embedded growth, if you will. And so we took over this project in 2014, and that's when you really see the reduction in cost over time. I'm going to make this point here. Everyone likes to talk about how great contractors are. Boy, make the organization flexible and have contractors. And you'll see in my own finance area, that's fool's gold many times. What happens is when you have contractors, they become first of all, they become easier to hire because they don't go through the normal HR process. So they just become like water in a company. You end up sometimes having duplicate efforts. So the area so not only did we take down overall headcount 46%, but the real push was to get rid of the contractors because we found that they were not necessary, in many cases not necessary, and in many cases they were very easy to hire, and they just had sort of ongoing stay power, if you will. Never reviewed because they weren't part of the HR review process, or quarterly review process, so it's sort of insidious if you think about it. So I would highly recommend think about contractors in your organization. Offices, wow, yeah, I could tell all kinds of stories. We had an office in Geneva, which was our headquarters for Europe. Why? I had no business in Switzerland whatsoever, zero. But why? Because that's where the CEO of Europe wanted to live. Made no sense, very high cost, killed that office. Took a lot to kill the office because they were very high paid people. But nonetheless, closed a number of offices all over the world, so 28 offices to get down to here. And by the way, the revenue still went up, so it's a case of just really consolidating offices. Cash flow. Obviously I'm a finance person, but I would say very focused on cash flow. It's one of the areas where I see companies clearly lazy on cash management. Just to give you an example, even I would tell people in my own area, I would review cash collections for the whole company weekly with our accounts receivable people. So I would have an ongoing meeting every week. We'd get all the people together and go through cash collections. This is, again, a $5 billion company. I'm CFO of 300 people in my organization. But it was that important to me to show the emphasis. And again, another company I was in that was hard for cash. They used to have cash nuggets and focus. So managing cash and capital allocation, really important. And I'm going to go through this and how you can really think through this. So cash flow, we managed it. So managing free cash flow is one of the things I wish we put more emphasis on accounting point of view. So $1.1 billion of free cash flow. We did do some M&A, but on the same time, over a 3-year period, we repurchased about $10 billion of our stock. So we used cash flow to repurchase stock, create a humongous value by renegotiating our arrangement with Alibaba, which was our biggest investment, which is one of the reasons why companies sold the core business and split off financial assets. And the company still exists in terms of financial assets. It's called ABA, A-A-B-A. Altaba is the formal name. And this last item is important. We looked for areas of opportunity. We raised a $1.4 billion convertible debt at the time at 0% interest rate, so we picked a great time to raise some money. We monetized our IP to the tune of $600 million. We used some hedging in our investment in Yahoo Japan, and by sort of picking some right times and doing it really opportunistically, also raised $700 million of cash flow for the company. So that really worked out quite good in terms of opportunities. Brought our share count down, cash buybacks. I'm not going to go through this, but it was really key in terms of how we thought about Alibaba and our big investment there. We had, well, now it's probably a $60 billion investment with the company. But we renegotiated, so we sold a lot less shares in the IPO, and so therefore we retained more, and the stock has gone from 68 the IPO to 170, 180 today, so that was where we gained some money. We separated the company. So why am I here? Because I was part of the core business, and when we sold the core business to Yahoo, many of us left, and we don't want to have to do different things. Altaba still exists, and that includes Alibaba, Yahoo Japan, and so forth. So we split it off, so that now is part of Verizon. We'll see how that goes. I think my personal opinion is it is obviously hard to run a public-oriented company in Silicon Valley out of a New York-based, carrier-based company, but we'll see. We'll see. Quick summary there, but I'm not going to go. Let me go through, because I wanted to go through that. Now what I want to do is take you through how I went about my own organization. So what I did there is Yahoo and Corp. Now how about our own team? And some of the same things. The number one thing, though, is I realigned the organization. Again, you know, in the case, I think I was a little bit more successful than Marissa Maya, my CEO, was at the beginning. So in my case, I inherited 13 people, got down to about 10 because we had too many. 3 of those, over time, I asked to leave, and I hired 3 people. And the thing that's worked well for me is I've been able to hire people that have worked for me in the past, and they came to work for me again. So I was able to realign the organization. As I said before, we drove insourcing, and it's just the opposite. Everyone wants to talk about outsourcing. We insourced, much more cost-effective for us, decrease finance costs and increase financial controls. So a little bit, I'm not going to go through this. The key thing here is, which I feel good about, proud about, is I kept some of the long-term, long-standing employees that work for me. So in the case of 7 of those, I kept 7 had worked for me, added 3 that had worked for me in the past. But we had employees that worked for me that had been in the company 10, 15, 17 years, which I felt good about. Again, brought in some other people. But those folks didn't use recruiters, had worked for me in the past. This chart I will take a minute or two on. I think it really summarizes what we did. We organized around the business operations. We right-sized, like I mentioned, from 13 to 10. We centralized my own group into key offices. Sunnyvale. Turns out we had a big accounting group in Omaha, and that's where I hired my corporate controller from Omaha. Very cost-effective, very hard-working, very good group. Moved, as I said, our European headquarters from Geneva to Dublin. Dublin is a great working environment. I've had a number of companies who have been associated with Dublin and Ireland. You know, everyone wants to talk about going to Ireland because of taxes, which that's certainly an aspect, and it's good. But I can tell you the hard-working ethics of that area, Dublin is phenomenal, and I highly recommend Dublin as a place to run a European operation. And by the way, when I mean Europe, you know, we had sales there, we had finance there, we had customer support there, we had some marketing there, so we had a lot of people in our Dublin office. Created a center of excellence, as I mentioned, accounting in Omaha. Headcount reduced by about a quarter, as I said. Genpact was our outsourcer. Reduced that by 50% because, again, I wanted to insource, just the opposite. What you hear by everybody was talk about outsourcing. I did just the opposite. College recruiting. I had been college recruiting since my very first CFO job back in the early 80s when I was a number 7 employee at Hillside Technology, and we took that company public and grew from I was 7 people when I joined to several thousand when I left. We started the college recruiting program 2-3 years in. I always found it was easier to hire very good college people than trying to hire people the experience. So big push in college and retain top talent, as I talked about. So here it is. You can see a little bit of what we did in terms of reducing our expenses and headcount. Reduced it by 35% in terms of, again, finance spend. And so when you saw G&A go down by about 2 percentage points over time, half of that 2% came from finance. So by the way, the case, if you remember, G&A actually, the company went up a little bit and then went down. I saw when I first got there that we were bloated, and so we started working right away on getting the cost down. In my case, I used Deloitte for some work, and again, they know the areas, so we use them, and again, they have a tremendous amount of data on different finance and accounting transactional areas, so we use that to reduce costs. We went through each of the items, so here it is, and you can see where we were. You can see where the median was in top 25%, and we went after the core areas. So again, I highly recommend when you think about your company, think about breaking it down to each of the functions. Think about how to look at best practices and figure out where the easy wins, if you will, and the easy and big wins, which we did. I mean, you can see some areas for us: tax, which was a major area; FP&A, which is something I know quite well, was an area. So we attacked those. Treasury as well, and we saved a lot of money. Treasury, insurance, everything. This thing is interesting. Even when I came to my new area, it is amazing, and again, this is one of the things if you take away, think about the approval matrix. Who approves what? Who approves wire transfers? Who approves spending, T&E spending? Who approves purchase recs? Who approves capital? When I came to Yahoo, yeah, we're a big company, but the CFO, my predecessor, only approved things came to $5 million or more. I said, that's crazy. I need to know what's going on. I have a fiduciary responsibility to know what's going on. I need to see the flow of the business. There may be things I want to challenge. So we went from $5 billion to 100,000. In my own area, I'm serious, in my own area, we went to 10,000. And you say, geez, I'm going to slow up, everything's going to be tough. If you have automated systems, we put in Expensify, put in automated systems in. I did it all in email. I could do it wherever I was. It was easy, quick, but it gave me a sense of a couple of things, and I just can't overemphasize this. Knowing the flow of the business, the rhythm of the business, feeling like I'm in touch with the business, people knowing if I'm looking at it, they better be looking at it. And I'm a pretty good negotiator, so there'd be areas that I would push back. So that's item one, and that had to do with hiring, expenses, all the areas, contracts, wires, and so forth. Capital asset review, so instead of having ping pong, for those of you in this room that have a lot of capital expenditures, instead of having ping pong on POs and emails and so forth, we had a meeting every week on Friday. Actually had one of the founders there, CIO there, myself. We would go through basically every major capital project and review it there. Even in my current company, making sure it's very clear what the procurement policy is, who approves what, how it works. T&E, I did not want to have on my watch a problem with T&E and people abusing it. So again, we used to, by the way, this is crazy. We used to have a term in purchase recs called after the fact, ATF. What does that mean? Well, it turns out if something had already been approved, had been spent, but it hadn't been approved, I went right through to approval because it was after the fact. There's nothing I can do about it. Well, that, again, counterintuitive because you're making it conducive. I mean, we had crazy things. You're making it conducive for people to go after, beg for forgiveness, if you will. So I made it nice and simple. There was no such thing as ATF after the fact. If you hadn't gotten pre-approval, I had to see, no matter, even if it was $10, had to come to me. Well, it's amazing how many of those things went away. So again, you go back and you get in the mix of doing things. You don't sit in your ivory office. All of you have probably nice ivory offices. You don't sit there and just let things go. You get in the mix of things. And that's always one of the things. And it comes back to something I said earlier on. I hadn't thought about it till I heard Bill Bradley talk. You have to be prepared to take some hits. This is not a popularity contest. You do what's right. That's how I've always looked at my career from the very first time I got a CFO job. I've always felt if I'm going to do it right, and again, if it doesn't work, I can get another job, and I will leave. If I get fired, I've never been fired, by the way, but I've always felt comfortable in my own skin that if I were fired for doing the right thing, I could live with that. I could live with myself, and I'd move on. And so that's the same way when I put some of these things in place. If you don't like it, it's fine. If Marissa thought I was not the right person for her, that's fine. She could fire me. It turns out I was the only one of all she hired 4 or 5 people from the outside. I was the only one that stayed through the whole time with her that she frankly didn't fire. We put some systems in place. The world is changing. So I would tell you, that's not the focus of my presentation today, but I would tell you systems are definitely changing. Think of the various SaaS models. ERP, it's been Oracle and SAP. And for the large companies, that may be the case, but there's a lot more now in SaaS. Workday is very successful. I'm in a company called Zora, which does subscription billing over the cloud. So there's a number of things that are changing over time. Anaplan for planning, which instead of using, constantly worksheets and spreadsheets and so forth, Anaplan. Expensify for expenses. Some use Coupa. So anyway, the whole world is changing in systems. Do not think of what you've used in the past, perpetual systems, as a way to go. It's going to be 10 years. We're going to wake up and it's going to be 100% cloud or roughly 100% cloud. So it is evolving. We did something unique here for our quarterly analyst meeting. We are the only company ever still to have done this, where we would do our quarterly analyst call live. And in video. I did it for a number. It's one thing I took credit for. I did it for a couple, 3 reasons. One is we had Yahoo Finance. I felt this would be a way to promote Yahoo Finance. 2 is Marissa is very charismatic and photogenic, so to speak. So I thought it would be helpful for us to get out there. And it was novel and an interesting idea, and I like doing things that are novel, and it really worked out well. Changed our annual report. She actually spent a lot of time on the annual report. And again, Marissa and I have a great rapport. I would work for her again in a nanosecond if something came up together, because we really enjoyed. And I really, one thing I learned about, and I'll talk about CEO a little later, but you have to have charisma, you have to have presence, and you have to have conviction in your ideas, and she had them all. A few rules of the road, and I'm going to go through this because there are a couple of charts which I think are really helpful, at least for me, because what I try to do is, from all the experiences I've had, sort of summarize that. So just a couple of things. Here's accounting, and again, you guys aren't accountants, so to speak, or finance people, but I just put some things here. I would say I will put up the number one thing, and number one course, I always say to people, the number one course I had in business school was negotiating. I still like negotiating. I think everything is negotiable. So that's really, really important. So really think about how to really take courses or seminars in negotiating. I'm not going to go through all this because I don't have time. I'm not going to even go through this. There are some hot buttons. So I would say no matter what role you are, in terms of today's world, transparency, really, really important. I mean, you see it all the time. Hell, you see it with the issues of Facebook, today. You see it with, the president and all the stuff he's got going on, which I'm not going to take an hour and talk about that. But being transparent, I used to have a term that one of my audit partners said is disclosure's your friend. So being transparent and never lying makes it easy to remember what you said. Cybersecurity, so straightforward. Cybersecurity, clearly, SEC's put a lot of focus on cybersecurity. I take that seriously. You see it every day. And I see it, even in my own place where I'm running Eric Schmidt's family office, and the amount of work we do on cybersecurity and thinking about hacking and so forth, and what Google does in terms of that is incredible. Structure, audit committee, again, just some things that maybe not as applicable here. The only thing I'd say is the world is different. The world is different today than when I started. So I look in the room here, and so what I could get away with, so to speak, in terms of how you manage people and being, maybe I was a little abrasive when I was younger and stuff, you can't get away with today. It's a very different approach. Work-life balance, rightfully so, is more in tune. How you give people time off at various different issues, really, really important. So your work-life balance is important, and that's a little bit as I talk about millennials, acceleration close. I talked about outsourcing, insourcing, and some other things. There's a number of things changing in accounting. ESG, I'll point that out. Environment, social governance, also very, very clear now. There's a number of companies that I've seen recently talk about how they 100% using renewable energy. I think Google, Alphabet's talked about that. Apple's talked about that. That's a big deal, and so forth. Again, non-GAAP financial measures. I'm not going to talk about some of this stuff. I'm not going to go through that. I'm going to go right to this. Here's some of my part of my what I call lessons learned. So the first comment I'll make is teams do matter. CEO, I'm going to cover that. A couple of my things I like to say about CEO teams. And so when you start a company, and I've been involved in 3 startups. I've been involved in 10 or over 10 companies that got on board early that we took public. This guy says I have 10 minutes. I'm just getting started. Oh, well. Anyway, I'll march on. I told you I can't do I may not be able to do the breakout, so maybe I have more time. Actually, I'm going to Ithaca tonight. At least I'm trying to get there. Okay, I'll keep on going. So anyway, these matter. So here's a bunch of stuff. You want to take a picture of it, but I can't tell you how important. See, everything starts with the CEO. I mean, it's no different in who's the leader of a company, who's the leader of a team, who's the leader of the country. And just a few things that I will point out. Decisiveness really is important. I have seen CEOs that don't know how to say no. You've got to be able to say no. It could not be more focused, more concerning. Sets the culture. I said this before. It's a combination of humility. I use this term later. Humility and arrogance. You have to be humble in a certain way, but you also have that arrogance of swagger, if you will. Really, really important. I think being charismatic and getting people. I like this term, trust, as a propellant into your company. When people trust you, it brings everyone along in the company. A number of people I've worked for, as a whole, I added Marissa to this chart recently, but I've worked for a whole bunch. Here are a few things I do want to take you through. Fairchild, I went to a downturn. It was my first company, went downturn. I used that, I got promoted. It really got me started. I also got controllership responsibility, so I learned that. Memorex, I learned how to manage people. Well, I sort of managed how to people, but I got some experience doing that, which is really, really important. VLSI, I got to VLSI as original CFO because someone I worked for at Fairchild recommended me into VLSI. So the networking is so important. Otherwise, I never would have gotten that job. I realized our business model from the get-go. I didn't realize at the beginning, but I realized we had a tough business model. So business models do matter. Really think through those. Cypress, what I learned there is we created systems that were focused on how the CEO wanted to run the company. Wouldn't necessarily work at other companies, but I've taken that to heart. So I create systems that work. And so, like I discussed at Yahoo, we create systems that are consistent with how the CEO wants to run the company. Sybase, we got hubris. That's the key message there. We went from 200 million to $1 billion In 4 years, we thought we owned the world. We were given Oracle run for the money. We let hubris get in the way of things. I went to At Home. There, unfortunately, we did a acquisition of a company, and then through that we changed CEOs, and that helped kill the company. Siebel, I realized, and I talked about Yahoo as a transformation, not a turnaround, because we always were in very good shape financially. But Siebel, we had to do a turnaround because of the downturn in 2000, and I realized I don't like turnarounds. I don't like having to take people out. Sometimes you have to do it, but it's tough. Fortinet, I went in there with the idea, the company was a great business, but poorly managed financially. The good news, they thought they could go public. This was 2007. Downturn came. Couldn't get an audit done, so we did a lot of things. And so we used a recession, if you will, to get our act together, create a whole bunch of market value, and today it has over $6 billion market value. When I went there, it was like $300 million. Yahoo, what are the messages? Transformations do take longer. So I look at what could we have done better. Transformations take longer than we set up expectations. Boards matter. We did not have alignment with our board ever, really. It's very, very tough. And so when I go into companies now, I get associated with companies. I look at the boards. Really, really important. Select management teams. Again, fortunately, in some of the hiring we did under Marissa, some of those folks didn't work out. We were, I thought, too lame in our PR and IR messaging, and so forth. So here's my last couple of charts. And so I'll maybe have 1 minute to take a question. Maybe I won't. But this is really how I think. Integrity is rule number 1. It is your most valuable asset. I used a comment before about professional courage. Orchestrate career. I had a sense early on I wanted to be CFO, so I looked at what functions I wanted to do and how to get there, and I sort of you can go through how I sort of thought about that in my prior charts as to how I learned. Make a difference. Go where the action is. I changed from semiconductors, which is where the started with the Valley, to database software, to internet, security, and internet. So in application software, I forgot. So I went where I saw the most action in terms of being, and that creates more opportunity for you. I think how you can improve the life of others as we get, one of the things that really upsets me now is just how much homelessness we have in this country, and a problem that I think is solvable. I do think, contrary to what some other folks, business is a noble profession. Bring your best every day. I'm a big reader, and so I can't overemphasize how important reading is, so I would say continue to read. I read a lot during the weekends, number of hours I'll read. Whether it's I'm talking about primarily business, whether it's Wall Street Journal, or Barron's, Economist, whatever. I think it's important to bring a professional appearance. That does matter. I hate to say that, but people, have compassion. I like this last one, 24. Someone asked Serena Williams years ago, I heard her talk, how does she deal with pressure in a match? And she said pressure is a privilege, which is true if you think about it, because you're only in pressure situations if you're in those high-level situations. Never giving up. Humility. I talked about humility and arrogance. One of the things that comes with being around for a while is pattern recognition. There's pretty much nothing I've never seen in various experiences, whether it's my own operating experiences, whether it's on the boards or various, and by the way, I didn't go through it all. I'm on a number of public boards, a number of nonprofit boards, a number of private boards, associations. So the more you get, the more you see. Pattern recognition is really very helpful. Last one I heard, which is really something I live, I don't worry about contracts. I mean, obviously I sign a lot, but I really believe that I use the word quote unquote man. Being a man of your word, both in terms of what you do business-wise, family, friends, colleagues, really, really important. And 34, I sort of heard this too. I hate wasting talent. So I don't really need to go through this. This is just something else. So let me stop there. We have a chance for 1 or 2 questions. I went through the last couple pages quick, but I knew I was running out of time because I wanted to at least take, if I have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Any questions for Ken?
Come on, you can't be all that quiet in this room.
Well, that was so comprehensive, Ken. Maybe they're just stunned. How about that? First of all, round of applause for Mr. Goldman.